Welcome to NatSat. Today's topic is all about human rights. With us we have Dr. Julie Morsillo. She has been with us before, and thank you for being with us today. But apart from being a community psychologist, you have worked in Victoria and Equal Opportunity Commission.
Yes.
And also in equal opportunity employment, isn't it? During the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
So you know all about human rights and equal opportunity. And let's start how human rights came to be.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, human rights came about. Human rights has been around for a long time. The United Nations Declaration of Human Rights,
yes.
Where a lot of many countries in the world, a majority of countries in the world are signatories, came about at a convention just after the major war at the Nazi era. And people said this must never happen again, the Holocaust with Nazi Germany, where so many people were killed. And it wasn't just Jews, as some people think, it was actually also people with disabilities, people with different sexual orientations, people with that were different and that weren't blue eyes and blonde hair, didn't cut it. And so people decided, no, this must never happen again. So nations from all around the world came together to sign a declaration that says we must never let this happen again. But they wrote it in positive terms, which I really liked, that people should be free to have dignity and respect.
But it took the Second World War to really put the whole world into its knees to say, okay, we need that.
Yes.
Some sort of an agreement into this declaration. And is it the Western countries that they participated mainly on that, or the other countries as well?
Oh, a lot of other countries as well, not just the Western. I think the main push was from the Western world.
Yes.
And America sees themselves as one of the main instigators, and the English.
Yes.
But it really was based in Switzerland because that was a neutral country. And so United Nations now is based in Geneva in Switzerland.
Now, since 1948, we are in 2014 at the moment. Quite a few decades.
Yes, yes.
Have we done anything right in relation to that? And where are we at?
Yes, because a lot of countries then went on to say, well, let's put it into more detail about what we need to make sure people do or are all treated with dignity and respect. And so they developed a whole lot of covenants, a whole lot of declarations, a whole lot of international, a whole lot of laws that they would hope would become more or less international. And a lot of them could come under the civic and political, and the Americans are really good on that because that's on about freedom of speech. But there's also economic, social, and what's the other one? Economic, social, and cultural. Yes. And that's about the right to work, the right for social security, the right for education, health.
But not all the countries, they really cover everything, isn't it?
Well, no, not as well as I think they do.
Okay.
No.
We claim we want to be champions in human rights, but we are not.
Yes.
Even in Australia.
Yes.
Isn't it? We have detention centres and everything. But
we've made a lot of gains.
Yes.
But not.
We still have a long way to go. Now, human rights, because I've read the definition and some elements into it, it is about dignity, isn't it? Yes. You want to touch upon that?
Yeah, I really
what do we mean by that?
Yeah, I think one of the things they talk about with the Declaration of Human Rights, it's about protecting the dignity of people and about promoting their dignity and respect, and that we all have a right to freedom of expression, to education, to health care, to be treated, to be able to work, to be able to have leisure time, to have freedom of speech. And however, that doesn't always come about as we would hope.
Yes. Yeah. There's another thing that I've read in definition that says we have the right not to fear.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes.
And I liked it the way it was expressed there.
I like the way you've said that, because that summarises a lot of things. Often we live in fear, and which is what ends up with war and anger and fear and war and shame and everything, and then you end up with terrible things happening. So the opposite of that is, well, let's behave in love and compassion and dignity and respect and promote that, because everyone has a little fear of the other. We all it's easier to get on with people that are same as us, or our immediate family. Well, not always easy for everyone, but easier to have people that are similar to you. It's working out how to get on with people that are different and appreciating diversity, not just tolerating it, but appreciating it. And I think over the years, Australia has done that so well, so often. Not all the time, but very often. We like to celebrate diversity at our best.
But it is quite a big challenge, though, to go as an individual beyond myself and my family.
Yes.
And accept the freedom of somebody else who is completely stranger, isn't it?
Yes, and I think we have it is really hard, but I think we have a good history of that in Australia. Well, we treated Indigenous people terribly, but and that is bad. But we have then sometimes tried to reach out to them and to reach out to each new people that come. And I think our Christian tradition has really helped with that, in that the Christian church has really promoted community services, and they started schools often, and they started the healthcare often, and they started saying, hey, we better start treating these Indigenous people a bit better. So I think they promoted that, and then really promoted that the laws strengthen those rights. And I think too, not just the Christian churches, the unions, Christian and non-Christian, really promoted it too. And I wonder if that comes from our convict heritage.
I think so. The story of Australia, at least, says that. Yeah. It's that equality, and the unions were quite strong in the previous century, so they did promote the equal opportunity and the in employment, in
minimal
financial
wage.
rewards. Exactly. We'll come back with some more challenges in relation to human rights. We will be back shortly to continue this conversation. Welcome back with Dr. Julie Morsillo in the topic for human rights. It is challenging sometimes within even the Western civilization, Western countries, to balance or to agree in human rights the way we exercise them.
Yeah, and I've noticed that some of us Western countries seem to think that we're doing really well, and America like to promote that they're very good on human rights, and in some areas they are very good, very big on freedom of expression and trying to promote the dignity of people at their best. But it was interesting, one time I was, the first time I went to Italy actually, with my husband to see his heritage, because his family originally came from there, and I was very eager to see. Anyway, I was very interested. We were travelling with a lot of Americans and only a few other Australians, majority Americans, and the tour guide very proudly at one point when we got to this big beautiful hospital very proudly announced that we have free healthcare and everyone can use this hospital and they don't have to pay. Well, some of the Americans were horrified, not in a good way, in a bad way, and us Australians are going, oh yeah, free healthcare, yeah, well, we've got that, and the Americans are going, what, even for those that don't work hard they would get to come in there for free? And they couldn't believe it, because they don't have free healthcare only if you've got a job, and sometimes it's attached to your job, but they don't get it. And they some of them couldn't see the good in that, which I thought was very surprising. But then later on in the trip was interesting. They said, oh, and how long are you over here? And because the tour lasted 10 days, and most of them, the Americans go, oh, we have to hightail it back to America, because the most holidays most of us get is 2 weeks holidays a year, some 3 if we're very lucky. And us Australians go, oh no, we're here for 6 weeks. because we get 4 weeks holiday a year, plus we saved up some of our long service leave or saved up holidays from the year before. So we have better health, workers' rights too, and we have minimum wage. They don't even have minimum wage. So,
but
yeah,
the freedom has a different definition, isn't it? In your example in America, if you can afford, then you can have education or you can have health, isn't it? In some other countries, really, it's not a matter of affordability, but it is a matter of equal rights. For example,
Yes.
here in Australia, when you hit 65 or now 67, you are entitled for a pension, unless really you're very financial sort of good enough. So otherwise,
Yes.
you're going to have it irrespective if you worked or not.
Yes, and you're entitled to a disability pension if you have struggled to work, or if you're out of a job, you're entitled very quickly. Well, that may change, but at the moment, very, very quickly to get some sort of support, some sort of welfare to carry you over, so you can still feed your children and put a roof over the head of the family. Whereas America doesn't have that.
That means even in Japan, is more strict, much less holidays as we do. But by the sounds of it, the philosophy of it is freedom is the basic, the freedom of our dignity.
Yes.
As we mentioned before,
Yes.
is the main principle behind the human rights,
Yes.
irrespective to the local rules.
Yes.
For employment and for education and
And if you treat people with dignity, they actually produce more and do better.
absolutely.
I
Yes.
remember when I was working at the Equal Opportunity Commission in Victoria in the 90s with Jeff Kennett, with our Premier at the time, and he was saying, "Oh, we've got to cut back on the lunchtime. We've got to cut back on morning tea and afternoon tea." But actually, if you give people more breaks and treat them with dignity, they actually work better during the time that they're working.
And this is the positive force, the positive
Yes.
reinforcement of human
Yes.
rights.
Yes.
But unfortunately, at the moment, we're still dealing with wars and dealing with a very, very awkward situations around the world, and the international organizations, they really have to really force peace amongst the people to accept each other. And nowadays, with universities we've gotten the wisdom, we should not be in that position. What do you think is the problem? Is this the politicians or the business?
I think it's often comes down to a question of power.
Okay.
If people use their power or abuse their power, or then that's when you end up in trouble. So at the moment, the powerful are making sure they get more and more money, and the not so powerful get less and less. And the more difference there is in and people aren't equal, and that things aren't equitable, and you have some people in poverty, that's where you end up in war. And so war isn't about, oh, I just don't like this person because of their colour eyes. War is about people being in despair because they're in abject poverty and they're not being helped out of that poverty. And the powerful, sometimes ultimate power ultimately corrupts, and that's where you end up with this inequity, and then you end up with wars and problems.
And even now, we can see that even in our country, here in Australia, we can see that distance between the poor and the rich widens up,
Yes.
isn't it? Becomes
A
bigger.
report that just came out that one of my mentors, actually Dr. David Morovitz, he's a psychologist and an economist, he helped write it, and with a few other very talented scientists as well. But they come up with that the inequality in Australia is actually increasing. So the richer are becoming richer and the poorer are becoming poorer. Whereas if we were truly living out our human rights declaration and building things the way we should be, that should be coming less, so that people who haven't got so much money are lifted up, and those that have got it share it more and pay all their taxes, so that we get more.
And that is quite a challenge, because we can see that if that inequality keeps going the way it does, that will endanger the human rights declaration in itself within the country, isn't it?
Yes.
So depends how strong are going to be the people later on to sort of drive towards human rights, isn't it?
Yes.
Quite a few challenges with human rights. We'll be back shortly after the break We'll be back after the break. Stay with us. Welcome back to our program. We continue the discussion on human rights. It is very challenging today, thinking we live in a very competitive society. Does this help the human rights, or we are too competitive? Or
I think too competitive. A little bit of competition gets people moving, gets people working, but too much leads to too much inequality, whereas cooperation is the way to go. In fact, some studies looking at the happiness factor about people's well-being, people that are healthy physically and emotionally, have come up with really interesting statistics. And interestingly enough, the people who are the happiest aren't necessarily the richest at all. In fact, when they looked at whole communities, there was two really interesting ones. One was in a very poor country. People didn't have much money at all, but they came up with really good well-being. And it turned out they grew a lot of their own food that was very, very healthy, and they all shared it. So it's people being at the same level and not having competition with the Joneses next door, but actually sharing. Or you hear of African children saying, oh, if you were to win a prize of this bowl of fruit, wouldn't that be great? And they go, what do you mean? We'd share it with the other kids anyway. So it's about sharing. And there's another interesting one in this same study as that first town that I talked about in a poorer country. It was in America, and this small town in America came out as one of the happiest, but it wasn't the richest. It was a town where nearly everyone had come from Italy. They'd come out together and they celebrated everything together. So they didn't have high, necessarily a lot of money. They just were on average wage, but they were all on similar wages when they came out. And they had celebrations they celebrated together. Their Christian tradition of, the Virgin Mary celebrations or whatever, and martial arts, and talking around the piazza, and talking and going to each other's homes for hospitality. This went on for decades. They kept coming up the best. It was a longitudinal study. They kept coming to the best until very recently, and they dropped. Do you know what they dropped?
Why?
Not because because anything went terribly wrong in the community. In fact, interestingly enough, for decades, some of them were getting higher wages, but they just put it in the bank. They didn't show it off. So the houses seemed the same, seemed very middle class, even though some were going into upper class. They acted still middle class. So the people stayed happy. They were all the same. The difference came when some of the young ones moved away, got a higher education, came back and flaunted their wealth. That's when the change came. But when everyone cooperated, great.
That means intentionally we need that cooperation, not just on the surface, isn't it?
Yes, community-minded and appreciating community together and celebrating community together without flaunting that I've got more than you.
That means if you take that intentional cooperation out, if the intention is not there, it hurts really the community, isn't it?
Yes.
And in Australia, we do have a lot of challenges. And we're talking about cooperation. How can we say that when we have the asylum seekers and the children in detention center? We have women in crisis in the society, which is quite a bit. We have recently with the statistics, especially with the newspapers, we don't do very, very well as a society supporting those in marginalized. Even those in that have nowhere to stay and they're homeless.
Yes.
And recently Salvation Army really brought that up as quite a big problem as well.
Yeah.
And how we travel as Australia?
Well, first, I think we've come a long way, and we've done some very, very good things. But sadly, the inequality is growing, as I said before. And sadly, the latest statistic is showing that 85 people, or 85 nuclear families, or whatever it is, 85 families in the world, the richest ones, own as much as half of the poorest part of the population. That is a terrible statistic. And someone was telling me the other day, this couple that were fighting over their trillions, over their billions, not just millions, billions. And you go, that doesn't make sense. Why aren't they sharing it? And then one of the richest people in Australia came out with something weird recently that said, I don't think we need to pay people very much. $7 an hour would be enough. And you think, what? She's got a millions, yet she can suggest that. It doesn't seem right. And then as far as the way we treat each other, look, we've come a long way.
Yes.
But we've still got a long way to go.
Despite we do have a parliament, upper house, lower house, we do have the means to bring and change the laws. We still see how difficult it is to say, yes, this is an obvious problem, but we still cannot solve it. I'm not sure. Then we'll come back to the argument. We have to be intentional.
Yes.
Cooperating and working together.
Yes.
With asylum seekers when they come in, with different groups, marginalized groups, so they can be empowered. Come into the human rights, isn't it?
And we do have a good history of that in Australia. That mateship concept is very, very much about caring for each other and looking after each other. And we're very good with our friends and our nuclear families. Now we have to learn to be good with the stranger, with the other. As Jesus taught us, and a lot of religions teach us, we are to be compassionate to those that are different and not just tolerate but celebrate their differences and show compassion when they are in need. And to me, the biggest stranger at the moment is asylum seekers. We need to reach out to them.
And actually, it is, you said a phrase before which I like in relation to the asylum seekers. They are most in need and most marginalized at the same time.
Yes.
It doesn't match, isn't it?
Yeah.
And they are the most in need at the moment. And something that shocked me this week, if I can... this week, this is only from the 3rd of December 14, United Nations Food Agency cuts aid to 1.7 million refugees because we don't have enough money, and the money that they need to feed these people and to take care of them is really nothing compared to the budget we have in Australia.
Yep. And we do have a history of giving to aid, and individuals do as well as the government, but unfortunately it's not enough, and we're not going up in proportion to the amount of money that we earn.
Yes, that's right. It's a very difficult topic. What would be the most prominent step that we should take today
to change?
To improve.
Well, we can be much more generous nation. We survived the global recession better than any other country in the world. Our treasurer year before last got an award for one of the best in the world, and because we kept up employment and did all that big schools program and things like that, and so we should now be the generous ones that give more generously, not pulling back. So give generously to those in need overseas, asylums overseas. Give generously to the asylum seekers here. And countries are showing us how to do it, like Norway, Finland. Why don't we copy them? We copy them in some things. Why don't we copy them in this?
We did come with intentional cooperation and giving.
Yes.
Dr. Julie, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
This topic of human rights. Thanks for staying with us. We're going to see you again next week with another topic.